So today I'm speaking with Ira Israel. I first came across Ira and his work on Gaia.com, and I've since taken his online course on Udemy called Authenticity and Awakening for Lovable Idiots. And I'll have him explain the title in a minute. Ira is a licensed counselor, a psychotherapist, an NLP master practitioner, and the author of the book, How to Survive Your Childhood Now That You're an Adult, A Path to Authenticity and Awakening. I love Ira's work. He has traveled extensively in his own search for meaning in his own life, and he's a fountain of wisdom with all that he's discovered on his journey. Ira's passionate about living authentically, being aware of how you show up in the world, and using a variety of tools to recognize, accept, and move beyond the things that get under your skin, living your life more and more in alignment with your highest self. So welcome, Ira. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Courtney.
So we have a lot of women in the audience that are looking to create change in their lives. They want to live a fulfilling, vibrant, happy life, but they feel stuck and they aren't sure how to move forward. So can you talk to us a bit about the work that you do and how you help others begin creating that change in their lives?
Well, I always start my classes with my favorite quote. I don't know who discovered water, but I doubt it was a fish. So the first thing we have to do is look at the water which we swim in, which is our assumptions. Essentially, we're all operating on autopilot all the time. We're trapped within a language. We're trapped within an ethos. We're trapped within systems of thought such as capitalism, the myth of romantic love, democracy, all of these things. So we have to analyze them because we're living in incredibly turbulent times. The sex roles, gender roles, everything's kind of like in flux right now. So when I work with people, I kind of have to just sit there and listen and understand how they learned to become whoever they are, right? Because you're born with this blank slate to me. And then, you know, as animals, we're supposed to basically, you know, horses can walk 20 minutes after they're born. But we need 2 years, and if anyone leaves us alone for 48 hours, we just die, right? So we're totally dependent creatures, and yet we live in this capitalistic society which says we need to make this baby into a productive person. We need to, you know, let it cry itself out. What doesn't kill it makes it stronger. I mean, that was the ethos in the 1960s. And now we have attachment parenting, which is lovely and amazing. We have Montessori schools and some other wonderful things. But essentially, we have to look at why you think the things that you think. And that's always interesting to me. So that's always the first step in working with anybody, just trying to figure out how they came to the conclusions that they came to about what life is, what they're doing here, what potentially could make them happy or live a meaningful life, things like that. That's
great. So, and one of your teachings is around owning your own life and taking responsibility for every aspect of it. And so part of that is being aware of how you think and how you learn and all of that, and how you interact with your surroundings. But part of that is also accepting everything, every aspect of your life, all of the things that have happened to you, good, bad, indifferent. And so can you talk about that? Can you talk about, you call it walking the fire. So can you talk a bit about what that means?
Yes, I'm going to get into that in 30 seconds. But first, I want to talk about pedagogy. So I took a course on Wittgenstein a couple of years ago, and I noticed that, you know, if you read Philosophical Investigations or even the Tractatus, he writes in aphorisms, and they're numbered in a certain way, and they're just like one sentence, you know. So I make a joke in my classes, and I say, I don't think you can teach anyone past the age of 10 years old anything, but you can inspire them. You can inspire them to want to learn. So for me, there's a word in French, it's leurre, which is similar in English, leurre, where, and I actually like in English, tease. So if I tell you the world is flat, you're like, no. And if I tell you the world is round, you're like, yes. And if I say, like, look at the horizon, like, what do you see? you know? So we have to lure people into going outside of their own paradigms. We have to tease them into entertaining new possibilities, right?
Yeah.
So for me, to answer your question, how to own your life, I've been on the path I was on the path for 25 years. And I studied philosophy for 8 years. And then I studied spirituality, Buddhism, Hinduism, Kabbalah for 8 years. And then I studied psychology for 8 years. And it all came together when I started teaching. And I made the DVDs, Yoga for Depression and Anxiety, Mindfulness for Depression, Mindfulness for Anxiety, A Beginner's Guide to Happiness. Like my whole life, just if you looked at the 30 years prior to that, you would have said, oh, you know, he's lost. Like, I'm so like, what is he doing in India? Like, what is he doing in Paris? Like, why does he sit around and read all day? What's wrong with that man? And then it all came together, and one of the key ways it came together was owning the past. And it's funny because a friend of mine told me, and this is in another context, she said, Ira, you know, you have an adverse relationship with the film industry. And I didn't understand it when she first said it, but years later, I was just thinking, like, I didn't grow up out here, and my way of like ingratiating myself with filmmakers was not working, right? And so I took that phrase, and I was doing a course like the one you took that I give on Udemy, and I thought, wow, like I have an adverse relationship with reality. You know, reality is that I have a scar from here to here, and my face was blown off my head. And I have a scar on my leg from my knee all the way to my hip, where my femur was replaced with titanium rod. And for some reason, for like 25 years, like I kind of subconsciously was like looking in the reflections, like, is it gone? Mm-hmm. Like, is the scar gone? Like, is it like, you know? And then I when I was taking all of these courses on consciousness, I realized that this is the way the mind is built. The mind is built to create resentments, woulda, coulda, shoulda, didn't. Like, so I'd be sitting there and I'd be like, oh, well, I'd be happy now if I didn't have the scar on my face. And that is an adverse relationship with reality. I do have a scar on my face. So my walking through the fire was sitting in one of these courses in a dyad with a partner. And instead of having an adverse relationship with reality, trying to shove a square peg into a round hole, like I write in my book, I just turned to him. I said, I'm supposed to have these scars on my face. I'm supposed to have this discomfort in my leg. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just as absurd as me walking around saying, I'm not supposed to have these scars on my face, except for one of them is the cause of suffering. And the other one is owning your life, you know? And we've all been through traumas. It's not a contest, but for me to overcome and transcend and be able to help other people, I had to walk through the fire, which was owning, this is who I am. Like, this is it, you know? You only live once, if that.
Yeah.
And there's that other beautiful quote that I use at the end of my lectures. Let me see if I haven't said it in years, but the definition of hell is, on your deathbed, you will meet the person you became will meet the person you could have become.
Yes, and you have a ton of quotes, amazing quotes in your course, in your Udemy course, like amazing. Because I mean, I'm a fanatic of quotes, and there's a whole bunch in there that I've never heard before, so they're beautiful. And that one specifically gave me goosebumps. Like, it was very much like, how am I showing up today, and
right.
and what am I running away from? And really, at the end of my life, how much am I going to regret this? You know,
right?
And so you talked a bit about it. So you have the scar on your face. Can you give us some more detail? I mean, obviously there's a huge story that goes with that. And you've already talked about how there was a moment of acceptance of where you really walked that fire and accepted all aspects of your life. So can you talk a bit about that, giving us a bit more background as to how you got there? I know you specifically you said you were talking to a friend on the phone when you had that moment of like, I need
there's something, if I Bildungsroman in German, and it's a novel that's like the rites of passage, like Catcher in the Rye. Mm-hmm. So what I'm interested in terms of shifts in consciousness, like there's a plaque when you go down the Grand Canyon, and it says, your body needs 2 quarts of water to go down because it'll take twice as long coming back up. And then at the bottom of the plaque, it says, for teenagers and other people who think that they're invincible, do you know what temperature your brain fries at? And that's really interesting to me, because when you're a teenager, you don't have death in your consciousness. You're like, yeah, I could snort an 8-ball of cocaine. Yeah, I can jump off. I can skateboard off of this mountain. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I'm not going to die. What's death? I don't know, right? And then all of a sudden, your grandfather, like you're at a funeral, you know, when you're 8 or 15 or something, and then you're like, wow, like this is not infinite. Like, I'm not invincible. That person died, or everyone dies. I'm going to die. And then, so for me, the car accident in 1985 and recuperating and watching movies, it really put me in another kind of, it put me on another path of, you know, like asking all these philosophical and spiritual and psychological questions. I mean, I joke, I think that it's embarrassing that I spent 25 years studying, but I'm a late bloomer, you know, so I meet people who know these things already, and I feel stupid, but this is my path.
Yeah, no, and I mean, we all have our own path. We all have our own way of showing up where we show up. And as you say, like, you know, yours was very much an absorbing, taking in. It makes me think of kids that are learning to speak multiple languages at the same time, right? And so they're just these absorbing sponges. And you think, oh, they're a late bloomer. Oh, they're not gonna, you know, be able to talk well. And you know, they're not talking and they're already 2 and blah, blah, you know, and then they just come out and they're like, they've got, you know, this full vocabulary in multiple languages and everything like that. So I think it's very similar to your own story of you were an absorbing sponge, and now you're projecting that for everyone, to share your wisdom, all of your learnings with the world. And it's incredible. So I want to talk about your course on Udemy called Authenticity and Awakening for Lovable Idiots. This is specifically designed to help us move through this awakening process, this stepping into ourselves, this, you know, learning to speak our 20 languages. But before we go any further, can you explain why you chose that title for the course?
Well, the only thing that correlates strongly with happiness is the quality of our intimate relationships. If you want to have great, secure, loving relationships, you have to learn how to be authentic. So I refer to America as a great resentment factory because we're taught to we have a false self that we devised and created to survive our childhood, right? And whatever, if you were the sarcastic one or the athletic one or the jock or the geek or whatever you were, that's great. But if you're still using those same tools when you're 35, you're probably pushing people away. So authenticity is, as we just mentioned, owning like who you became, and then you know, deciding, and this is we'll get to in the terms of congruence, deciding like who you want to be, so that on your deathbed you don't meet that person and say like, I'm not that person, right? I mean, and it's a luxury that we live. We're not running from lions and tigers and dinosaurs. No one's shooting at us today. So my book opens with the phrase by André Gide. It is better to be loved for who you are than hated. It is better to be love for who you are, then hated for who you are not. Did I get that right? I should go get a copy of my book. So we have this paradox where we created this false self to seduce other people into liking us, and then we resent them for not loving the messy inner part of us that we didn't show them. And so authenticity for me is the only way out, and being able to speak authentically and compassionately with other people. And then the other component, awakening, there's an irony there. And it's funny because I live in Santa Monica, and I could throw a stone and hit some narcissistic, phony, like yoga teacher who just wants to be famous, right? And so for me, awakening, there's no such thing as enlightenment. If someone says I'm enlightened, you should run a mile. That person is a psychopath or a sociopath. Like, there's no such thing as enlightenment. Mm-hmm. I do believe in moksha, which is liberation at the point of death, like from the wheel of samsara. That's my own personal belief, having studied reincarnation and things like that. So for me, awakening is surfing the paradox that life is essentially meaningless, and we all want to live fulfilling, happy, meaningful lives. The phrase that I really like, and I hope this raises consciousness with some of your viewers, is life is meaningless, and it's meaningless that it's meaningless.
I could sit with that one for a while.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, for me, and this goes to the 12th step of all the 12-step programs, being of service. If you want to live a meaningful life, then, the smile on a blind person's face when you walk them across the street is a lot more meaningful than looking at your bank account and seeing $1 million. Right? I mean, like we've all been fooled into thinking that material possessions and all these things will make us happy and things. And we're just, all those people who believe that, they're actually slaves, right? And that's, so getting back to your first question, like we live under this myth of optimization. Like I want to have a cut body, and I want my colon to be optimized, and I want my teeth to be optimized. I want everything to be optimized. I want it, whatever. And that's the new slavery. Yeah. It's like Brave New World in 1984 or something. You're just, so instead, awakening for me is understanding that all of this is Maya. All of this is illusory, right? That doesn't mean I'm going to run into the wall and think I can run through it, but that if I want to live a meaningful life and have tools to keep me at the high end of my happiness spectrum, that I really have to go out and do a lot of research and then make choices and have practices and show up in a certain way so that I'm not just a bundle of reactions waiting for stimuli. So that's, I hope that answers the question on what is awakening.
It does, yes. And so why lovable idiots? What does that mean?
Well, as I say in the course, I quote Harville Hendricks: "The subconscious purpose of marriage in America is to enable us to complete our childhoods. Our parents had deficits. Those deficits wounded us. Those wounds became defense mechanisms, and those defense mechanisms became our personalities, and we'll always be attracted to people who can replicate the dynamics from one or more of our primary caregivers." And then Marianne Williamson says, and if they can't replicate them, we'll train them to. So what I feel is that as sentient beings, we all want to be loved unconditionally. And we grew up in this crazy society that only gave us tools to gain love conditionally. So there's a wounded child in all of us. And if you're 7 years old or 8 years old, your consciousness believes that the world, the universe spins around you. Right? Yeah. So if your mother gets a migraine, or if your dog gets hit by a car, like your mind processes it as, there must be something wrong with me. If I were perfect, then that bad thing wouldn't have happened. And this is like the origin of the epidemic of low self-esteem that we have in our culture. these traumas that are assimilated as I'm not good enough. I'll be good enough when this happens. I'll be good enough when that happens, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to look back and see our attachment, which we'll speak about in a second, in order to understand why we attracted that partner that we have, who now we look at sometimes, if we're honest, and we're like, really? Like, did I not tell you that to put the toilet seat down 4,000 times? What the, like, are you some kind of if idiot? Like we've been married for 30 years. Like, what's going on? You know? So I just love that phrase, you know, like, cause in some capacity, we don't know our subconsciouses, and we don't know our partner's subconsciouses, and we really have to raise certain things to consciousness in order to not get triggered, not have the wounded child in us show up and throw a tantrum.
Totally. And so I think even the most enlightened relationship experts find themselves in those moments, like, why are you chewing with your mouth open? Why are you doing these things? Like, crazy, right? Before they have that aha moment and go, oh yeah, I have tools to work through this. and so I think there's a lot of women that are in these relationships that are finding themselves in these moments over and over and over again, and really starting to question why they're with their lovable idiots, right? Why are they doing this?
Here's a good reframing of it came to me from Eckhart Tolle 17 years ago in The Power of Now. He said, the only reason you should be in a relationship is because you want to learn.
Right. And that is such a huge shifting of that perspective. If it's not just, I mean, I've gone through my own experiences, my own personal experiences for sure in that, and that it is such an incredible doorway to growth. Like, it is, I mean, it's incredible because it's that stuff that gets under your skin.
Listen, when you're sitting with your partner tomorrow morning and whatever happens, you should just look at him or her and say, like, thanks for being such a doorway to growth.
Right. Yeah, no, my partner already knows that. I thank him all the time. So what you're saying though, is that while these things get under our skin and we're going, why are we with this person? Why am I with this person? Why did I spend the last 30 years with this person who still doesn't get me and still doesn't listen and still gets under my skin, and more so now than ever? So what you're saying though is that this isn't a time to throw in the towel. These are our mirrors. This is our doorway, mirror, whatever, to our own limiting beliefs and that self-sabotaging behavior. And that with that awareness, we can connect to them on this much deeper level.
I want to add one other thing. So chapter 4 in How to Survive Your Childhood Now That You're an Adult is on the myth of romance, which originally Denis de Rougemont wrote a book called L'amour et l'Occident in 1949, Love in the Western World. And then Robert Johnson wrote We, the Psychology of Romantic Love, I think in the 70s. And so one of the problems that you're talking about is that we have these expectations and we don't realize that we're living out it's a thread, but in a lot of ways we're cliches, meaning that, like, when you watch Renee Zellweger and Tom Cruise in the elevator, and I forget which one of them turns to the other one and says, "You complete me." Mm-hmm. In my class, I say, what does that mean? Well, it means that you're really screwed because she's not always going to be there. Mm-hmm. So, like, you have to show up complete to a relationship. And if you're thinking this person's going to save me, this person's going to do this person's going to do that, those expectations are obviously disappointments waiting to happen.
Yes, absolutely. And that's, I think, where you get these unsatisfied marriages is where people are grounding through the other person, right? They're connecting through the other person instead of connecting through themselves and then showing up in that way. Okay, so let's talk about, there's the 5 aspects or principles of authenticity that you teach in your online course. And I'm thinking in your book as well, right?
Yeah, attachment, atonement, attunement, presence, and congruence.
Perfect. Okay, so let's talk about them, how they relate, each one. So I'll walk you through them so you don't get lost. But how they relate to living that authentic, awakened, vibrant life. And
Well,
let's start with attachment. I mean, we've kind of already gone into that a little bit.
no, well, no. The attachment is so. When I teach at Esalen, it's so fascinating to me. So there'll be 75 people in the class, and I'll say, and they come from all over America, and I'll say, raise your hand if your front door is unlocked right now. And so I grew up in New York City, and so it was really. There's like 3 different bolt locks, and then there's that thing. I can't even describe it. It's like it stops. It's like this iron rod, and so if a train hits your front door, it'll bounce off. And then there's a baseball bat in the corner, and then there's a gun in the drawer in your bedroom, right? So, attachment theory is so important because we all have paradigms that, we basically create theories of how the universe is operating. And then for the rest of our lives, we look for facts that rise to meet that theory. So if you believe the world is a dangerous place, like if your mother put you down when you were 2 years old and you cried yourself out, you might have, and this is why Mary Ainsworth's Strange Situation, 1969 experiments are so relevant and poignant, because you either are like kind of indifferent or avoidant, or you think the world is a terrible place. People will stab you in the back if you trust them. And again, for me, the first thing to do is recognize if you think the world is full of abundance and grace and love, or if you think like, oh, I really have to lock my door and have a baseball bat there, someone could attack me. Like we all experience traumas, and the first couple of weeks of our lives imprint us. So that's why I believe that attachment theory, even though we can't go back, and nobody filmed in 1966 the first 5 weeks of my life, but I know through my adult relationships with women some things about my attachment dynamics. And I know that there's certain times where I have to lean in, and there's certain times when I have to lean out.
Yeah. And I love that. You go into it in a lot more detail, obviously, in the course, but that for me was one of the biggest aha moments, was like really looking at that and how the same thing, how I relate to other people, and not just necessarily in my partnership, but also with my kids and with friends and my parents, and just like all of these different relationships, and how what my natural tendency is to withdraw. That is my tendency, is to pull back. But understanding that from that perspective of attachment and feeling that detachment from your mother, essentially, but that person, your primary caregiver. And so it's really interesting to see that link between something that happened so long ago and really how it has perpetuated and expanded into all areas of my life.
And the last thing I'll say about attachment is that one of the reasons it's so important is because, this relates to some other parts of, but babies want to eat when they're hungry and sleep when they're tired and play when they're playful and poop when they have to poop. And so my understanding of parenting is that you're trying to instill both self-esteem and self-regulation. And the two seem to be mutually exclusive, meaning that if you just teach your kid that the sun shines out his or her butt, then they might not have such great self-regulation, might be not have such great discipline. And if you're oppressive and incredibly negative, then your kids will get straight A's in school, but in the back of their mind, they don't have great self-esteem. Right. So the other component about it that I wanted to just pull this over because I think it'll apply to some of your viewers. So what I was speaking about was regulation, like self-regulation, and how we all get triggered and we lose it. right? We lose our temper and we say things that we don't really mean, right? Because we lose it. We lose our ability to regulate. And so once you know your attachment dynamic and you understand that you will be triggered if your partner doesn't return your text message in 3 hours, your mind says, he's fucking somebody else, right? Which has nothing to do with reality. Like he could be sleeping, but your mind, because of your attachment dynamic, is suspicious, So you have to understand how those dynamics and your assumptions about the way relationships should be trigger your primal abandonment and betrayal wounds. So when you get fired when you're 35, it's actually a reopening of an abandonment wound. It's not like you hate the job. You're ecstatic that they gave you 6 months severance, but in your mind, you have to cry yourself to sleep for 3 weeks because you were fired, because it's actually a reopening of your primal abandonment wound. Yeah. So understanding our triggers is a part of the attachment theory that I wanted to get across to your viewers.
No, and that is great. That is such an important. So what do you do when you're in that situation, when you've just been fired and you're crying yourself to sleep for the next 3 weeks? Like, how do you work through that?
I have two things immediately. One, the benefit of meditation is cultivating non-reactivity. Mm-hmm. So you're sitting there being tortured by your thoughts for 10 minutes every morning or however long you meditate. And at some point in time, you just have to laugh because your thoughts are absurd, And Nietzsche writes in the 5th book of the Gay Science, what if only the worst and most superficial thoughts rise to consciousness? What if the whole of your life were possible? Like my cat. My cat doesn't think what's for lunch. My cat's either hungry, not hungry, right? My cat, right? But you and I are sitting there like, how do I look? Is my antiperspirant working? When does the laundry have to be done? I hope the bathroom's clean if I have guests. You just have this thing, so you have to cultivate non-reactivity. And then when you get triggered, you can not get dysregulated and just look at the situation for what it is. Oh, this is really triggering me right now. And then the second thing is, I like the phrase, this is what it feels like. So if my mind starts to spin out, particularly like during the night or something with some kind of irrational fear, I'll say, wow, this is exactly what it feels like when my mind is spinning out. Right? So if your mind is spinning out, it's like a wild horse and it's dragging you through the desert, like you're just on for dear life being dragged around. But if you can say, oh, wow, I am not my mind. I am not my thoughts, right? Whatever part of me, whatever you want to call that, essential self, higher self, that's able to watch your thoughts, right? If you can say, wow, how interesting, like about the doorway that your partner creates. Wow, this is super interesting. Like, this is exactly what it feels like when I'm spinning out.
And so is that something that with meditation, with practice that you begin to cultivate? Like,
totally. Yeah. Well, you do it every morning in a practice, and you then it's a tool, and then you get cut off on the highway or something happens at Whole Foods, and you're able to make a decision rather than just be a bundle of prejudices and reactions. And that's where the key is. The key is in, and Viktor Frankl, his quote is really beautiful about this, the freedom that lies in realizing that you have a choice, that you don't have to react in a violent way or in a way that exacerbates the situation, that you can show up lovingly and compassionately.
And that, I love that quote, because that one continually, every single time I hear it, I can apply it to some other aspect of my life. And it's really that exercising your freedom. Like every
Right.
single moment of every single day, you always have a choice. You may not have a choice in what's being reflected back to you in your, your environment, in your relationships, but you always have a choice in how you show up, right?
Exactly.
If you choose to react or if you choose to respond in
Exactly.
with your highest self. Okay, so let's go into the other four. So we have the next one's Atonement. Can you talk a bit about what that means?
There's a painting in MoMA. It used to be on the third floor, called Attunement by Barnett Newman. So one-ment is not a word. So for me, atonement is cleaning up your past so that you can show up authentically for the present moment. So what you're doing is you're releasing your resentments. As I said before, these resentments, woulda, coulda, shoulda, didn't, they show up. It's your mind's way of thinking, like, I'm going to protect this person from trying to stave off. I'm going to stave off any potential future trauma by having this defense mechanism. Unfortunately, those defense mechanisms cause your suffering in many ways, and they hinder you from having the loving relationships that you want. Mm-hmm. So the tool for atonement is forgiveness. And as Lily Tomlin writes, forgiveness is giving up all hope of having a better past.
Which is, again, a beautiful quote. I love your quotes.
Thank you. No, it's not me. It's just forgiveness is giving up all hope of having a better path. So until, again, and this goes back to your first question of walking through the fire, because it's not fun. And this is like, whatever the 4th, 5th, 6th step in any 12-step program also, to forgive people unequivocally, no matter how uncool they were. It doesn't mean you have to be friends with them. It just you don't want to. Strong fences make healthy neighbors. You're allowed to you're allowed to say, I'm not going to allow this toxicity in my life. Right. But you forgive the person, and you clean up all of your resentments, let them go, so that those prejudices are released, and you can show up in the present moment and make healthy long-term decisions moving forward.
Right. And so how would you recommend somebody go about forgiveness? How like somebody that's been a victim of abuse, or how do they find that ability to forgive and to move on?
A lot of people journal. Your mind goes back to things and says, wow, that was really horrible. I'm never going to let that happen again. And, as I said, for 25 years, I had resentments about the way my face was shaped and the feeling inside of it and things like that. And I had bizarre, like, revenge fantasies and all these things. And I actually took a course on compassion, and I found the driver of the car on Facebook, and I set up a fake account and I did all these things, but I had a discussion with this person, and I, for whatever reason, showed up in a certain way, and that inspired him to show up in a certain way. And we were two gentlemen, and we had a discussion, and it's pages and pages long. And at the end of the week that we went back and forth, he apologized, and I wrote, if it'll help you in any way, I forgive you. Mm-hmm. But it was really me wanting to be free. Yeah. It wasn't, and then I closed the account. It's not, I've never spoken to him again, but there was just like this closure where it essentially erased like the resentments. And so I help people to do that. And, you know, a lot of people don't know who they would be if they gave up their resentments, right?
Absolutely. And in so many different aspects, people identify with that trauma, with that illness, with that whatever it is that holds them back. It becomes part of who they are, when really it isn't a part of who they are. It's just a part of their past, a part of that. It's an echo into
again, for me, it's understanding how your mind works, right? I mean, Kant wrote the Critique of Pure Reason in 60s. And so, you know, he was looking at categories of consciousness, and it would be interesting on a psychological note to understand like what the mind does to protect you, you know, in some ways. And I'll give you another quote, which is highly provocative, but it's in the course, so your viewers might like it. Ready? I probably shouldn't do this out of context, but unforgiveness is your desire to share your suffering. If you're not willing to forgive someone, that means you're not done suffering, and you're working through it, and you're trying to draw other people into empathizing with you.
Yeah.
And I don't, for having done that for 25 years, I don't think that that's the most skillful solution. And if you're able to forgive, that is a much more skillful solution.
And I know, just with my own practice and working with clients as well, as I do recommend the journaling a lot as well. And it really, like, just to kind of go with it, you don't even have to have complete thoughts. You can just, I'm feeling angry, frustrated, and just follow that, like, that thought pattern that goes, because it's that loop that you just go through and go through and go through. And when you actually start following it, then you're able to get some resolution through it. Whereas if you sit in it and avoid it, it keeps going.
For me, I love the word segue, right? So for when I'm meditating, one of the types of meditation I'll do is to try to observe segues, because it's very interesting. Like I can't do it right now, but that's how the subconscious, it's not really rational. But if you can observe, like I'm not, I mean, if I would be imitating a schizophrenic, but because that's like the basis of the amorphous way. But the threads that your subconscious mind picks up onto, like lunch, soup, you know, and to parking, I like it, and it's very, to watch like the segues between when you're meditating, and then all of a sudden you end up at like this traumatic moment or this thing that leads back, and you're like, and then after a couple of days, you're like, wow, that's so interesting. I keep on thinking about that time, whatever. And this is obviously how psychoanalysis works, but which is an incredibly indulgent practice in our contemporary society. So, you know, we all have to kind of feel into our own wounded children and understand what happened with them and why they get triggered and why we as adults think the stuff that we think. And then we can make tweaks and show up in more loving ways to get the relationships that we really crave.
Yeah. That's, and it kind of segues into the next aspect, which is that attunement.
Oh, yeah.
So can you go into a bit about attunement?
So everybody loves the quote from my book, mirror neurons do not fire via text message. Mm-hmm. So we need hugs. We're supposed to be like on our mom's breast for 4 or 5 years, and we're put down, to sleep alone. And it's a sign of wealth in our culture that your baby has its own room and all these things. And so attuning to other people means eye contact, and you need the same facial affect. That's what they found, the scientists found regarding mirror neurons. So throughout most of our days, when we're in shops and things like that, there's a lot of multitasking. and people are not making eye contact and sitting and nodding and validating consciously other people's emotions. Actually, what happens is, I think throughout most of our day, most people are unknowingly invalidating our emotional experiences. So therapy is good. You know, it's that frame of being in a room with somebody who's there. I'm Rogerian, so I create a safe space in order for my patient to reparent themselves. You know, it's non-judgmental and just, you know, love. And so again, this is the very first thing I said, looking at the frame of capitalism and the competition and the way people, you know, like I have this is my own pet peeve, but like I live in a society where there's a lot of women walking around with $4,400 handbags, and they're basically like, it's this weird subconscious competition when you see them at the cafes and they're like kind of checking each other out. It's called affinity grouping. You're like, it's kind of like having the first class lounge at an airport or first class. People, Carolyn Mace says, you know, we're all just trying to find our tribe. Right. And so our brains basically can remember 140 or 150 people. And then, you know, the Industrial Revolution comes and there's no more tribes. And all of us like live in our estranged from our families, you know, not with them, in these urban places. And now we have to go out in the world and see who's safe and who's dangerous. So we get a $4,400 handbag and we're like, oh, I can hang out with all the people who have $4,400 handbags, right? They're safe. They're not going to want anything because they already have their $4,400 handbag, right? So, but so what I'm teaching is no, like that's superficial. And the person with a $4,400 handbag, they're just as likely to screw you as anyone else. We need to really connect, like sit there, like eyeball to eyeball, break bread. It's the most important thing to me. Like sharing, you know what? Do you know the real reason why people clink their glasses and toast?
I don't know. I think I might, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
You want to guess?
No, I got nothing.
It comes from the feudal system. It comes from like the 1300s. You clinked your glass and a little bit of your whatever was in there got into the other person's and theirs got into yours to test that the other person wasn't trying to poison you.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah, that's why we toast. That's why we yeah. So yeah, I know people don't know these things. So we're all still trying to not get poisoned in a way. So we have to, but that's a problem of capitalism and the competition in it. And so we need to show up with compassion, not competition. And we have to show up in a way that is not ego gratifying, but like loving. You know, I always think of like in every instance, you have a little devil on your shoulder. That's your ego saying like, instant gratification takes too long. I want more now, more, better, different, more, better, different. I want this, I want this. And then you're like, how can I help this person? How can I be of service to this other person? I want it to say beloved on my tombstone, right? But there's this constant battle of your ego and then your higher self, your heart, your love, you know? Yeah. So getting back to attunement, we need to cut out time in our society to sit there and just break bread for me. Like, it's like, that's the most important thing. It's just sitting there and finding common topics and trying to avoid competition in conversations, like in terms of status symbols, like, oh, we went to Aruba for Christmas. Oh, Aruba's so passe. We go to Antilles. Like people just like, when they're talking, they it's interesting the way people try to connect and then people try to one up other people. I always just find sitting around listening to conversations like fascinating.
And I see that. I mean, again, so I'm in Mexico, so I have very much
totally different than from where I live.
But I saw it a lot because my clients are in the U.S. and I saw a lot of that through the election and not getting into one side or the other, but just this inability
Right.
to be somebody other than a Biden supporter or a
Right.
Trump supporter, or and not being able to really go beyond that. And you know, and it was like you need to see that everybody has all these different facets, and you know, talk to them about why they think that way, and really, like, instead of just pigeonholing everybody, it really just start to open your heart. And
the best example of this is from a lecture Eckhart Tolle gave. He said when he was watching ducks in the park and they fought, and then they like shook off their tails, and then they were friends again. Mm-hmm. And so you and I, like, when we can have differing opinions about things, and then hopefully at the end we shake our tails and we're like, well, this is a human, I'm a human, and we want to be friends. Not like, oh my God, what a horrible, you know. And this is what that film, The Social Dilemma, is about, that we all are experiencing different realities. And that's why our society is so bifurcated right now in terms of having 71 million people who believe in a certain paradigm, and then having 76 million people believe in another. You know, I don't think it bodes well for the future of the United States of America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But anyways, attachment, atonement, attunement, presence, and congruence. So,
okay, so let's jump into presence.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, I mean, also kind of in with attunement, right? Is just being present and being in that moment, and not, you know, getting into the mind and the judgments and all that stuff. But so can you talk a bit about presence? Because it's still, as much as we hear about it, it still can feel quite elusive to a lot of us.
On my first DVD, I say that depression relates to thoughts about the past. Anxiety relates to thoughts about the future. The past no longer exists. It's dead and gone. The future doesn't yet exist. It's not here yet. It's just your imagination. So how can depression and anxiety exist?
Right. And yet
so,
it does.
What?
I said, and yet it does.
Right. But the fact is that if you don't have the ability to pull yourself into the present moment, mm-hmm. and stop the resentments, the way the past is showing up for you, mm-hmm. or the fears that your imagination creates about the future, if you don't have the ability to just be there. And it's interesting to me because, again, as I said, there's no such state as enlightenment. There's no permanent state. But when you get those 2 seconds, and for me, when I meditate in the morning, it's, if you sit there and you say, I'm meditating, I'm meditating, I'm meditating, I'm meditating, I'm meditating, I'm meditating, you're not meditating.
Yeah.
But there's something that happens where your mind releases the thinking apparatus, the hamster wheel, and then retrospectively, you're like, wow, that was so calming and blissful to have those 2 seconds where my mind wasn't torturing me. Right? So that's why I dislike all those meditation teachers and all those things that are like selling calm and selling this and selling that, because really you have to look at, why are you not calm? Like, right? You have to, if you don't, again, I don't know who discovered water, but I doubt it was a fish. If you don't know the water you're swimming in, then you're just basically sitting there, like putting Band-Aids on every machete wound that you get.
Yeah. And so, I don't know where we should, okay. So talk a bit about meditation then, because a lot of people will say, I don't know how to meditate, or I've tried it and...
No. The best is, my mind, I think too much. Maybe other people can meditate, but not me. Right, and it's funny, I had this discussion yesterday with, so I'm 54 and I get a lot of patients who are like in their 20s, and they're all cranked up on ADHD medication, and then they have to take fucking trazodone or Ambien or something to sleep at night. And they don't realize this is insanity. Like this is like, we do these things to be productive productive members of society, get all amped up in the morning, and then, it just, we're not even keeled throughout our day. It's very, very interesting, the cycles of energy and why, we do those things. So for me, meditation allows you to observe how your mind is operating, and like your paradigm, your assumptions, and then have tools so that when you do fall into dysregulation and things like that, but it's I have people who practice like 2 minutes, 3 minutes. If it's unpleasant, if you just are like, hey, I've never meditated, I'm going to go on a Vipassana retreat, like that, you're not gonna, it's, that. So again, it's a tool. And yoga to me is a moving meditation. And it's only because we live in this crazy society. I was talking yesterday to someone, so I have a master's degree in Hinduism and Buddhism. So yoga started as 5 guys around a fire screaming to try to invoke God. And then in the Upanishadic period, it was the heat was generated tapas in the spine, the kundalini, the serpent energy, and things like that. And then nowadays, I don't even know what yoga had become with all of the fashion stuff and the yoga for better butts and yoga for tighter this and tighter that. And you're like, it's just like the history of it is astonishing to me. And I once had this yoga teacher in class, and she was like, if these asanas have been working for 5,000 years, they're good enough for you. And I'm like, the asanas are 120 years old. And most of the people think sun salutations came from the British Army in the 1930s. Like what are you invoking this putative legitimacy of a 5,000-year-old practice? I mean, it's just like, but nowadays, because of COVID, every yoga studio, has gone out of business. Mm-hmm. So it's a very interesting reckoning in some capacities. So for me, yoga and meditation are tools devised and designed to help you transcend your thoughts, so that you can realize your inner divinity. And I think I say in the course that one mountain, many paths. So, DMT is the rocket ship up the mountain, ayahuasca is the helicopter, and yoga and meditation are walking, or,
way up.
What?
Gentle way up.
Exactly.
So then just by doing the yoga, the meditation, then that is just something, this is again, just a cultivation of this inner state, of this presence. Of
non-reactivity, because you are a bundle of reactions waiting for stimuli. You don't realize how language is a cage. You're trapped in your mind. And until you realize that, and again, that's why I spoke about teasing and luring, to having new, better thoughts, learn a new language. Every year I try something different. I tried boxing 2 years ago. I try during COVID, someone invited me to play tennis. I haven't played tennis in 40 years. I was like, sure. I'm terrible. And I love it. It's beginner's mind. It's great. And when I tried boxing for the first time when I was 50, I was like, this is the new yoga, because you're like, there was just this whole thing happening. And I've just found it very beautiful. And I was terrible. And it doesn't matter. It's just you just have to always push your comfort margins just a little bit to have novelty in your relationships and in your own personal practices.
And that's exactly it, right? That brings you into the presence, right? Otherwise, we're in that autopilot, right? We're
right, exactly.
The conscious mind is running everything.
I know.
Imagining this or remembering that or whatever, and we're not in the moment. But when you're doing something new, like a baby learning how to walk, or the first time you have a car, you're hyper aware. You're so much in the moment that you can't not be in the moment.
There's a great example of this. Neil Peart, the drummer from Rush, who died last year, he was considered the greatest drummer in the world for probably about I mean, there's other people, Donardo Coleman and there, Brian Blades, and but if you went around ubiquitously in America, yeah, Neil Peart, right? And so he went through a lot of traumas. His sister died, his mother died, and when he was like 50, he relearned to play the drums lefty. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, it's like me, you see the guitars, like if I just was like, no, I'm going to restring them and then turn them around, it would cause me to start over and find new things, right? So if you need an analogy for like turning your life upside down, be the greatest drummer in the world and then start over.
Yeah. Yeah. And learn. Yeah, totally. Okay. So I want to make sure we get to your genius, your gift. Obviously all of this is your genius, but I wanted to finish up with the last aspect, the last principle of awakening. So, or authenticity. So, which is congruence. So can you talk quickly about that?
Sure. So it's an incredible privilege that we all can decide who we want to be and how we want to cut our hair and how we want to look and how we want to eat. Those are all privileges. Like a lot of people, most of humanity will never experience the luxuries and privileges that we have. And yet 22% of Americans woke up this morning and took antidepressants. Mm-hmm. Like that's fucked. That's the only way to put that, right? You live in the most privileged society in the history of humanity, and there's 100 million prescriptions for antidepressants written every year. That's insane, right? So congruence is realizing that you have that privilege, right, of deciding who you want to be and what you want to do, and then having the tools to be that person and show up in a way that's going to keep you at the high end of your happiness spectrum and allow you to live a meaningful existence. Mm-hmm. You know, so to me, as I said, it is better to be hated for what you are than to be loved for what you are not. It is better to be, it's so funny. Obviously, I don't sit around reading my own work, so I don't remember these things, but that quote, when I read that from Andre Gide, I'll say it again, it is better to be hated for who you are than to be loved for what you are not. Mm-hmm. So we create this false self to get some love the best we can, to get our psychological and emotional needs met when we're 7, 8, 9 years old. And whatever you did at that time is great. Mm-hmm. And I know that because you're here. But those same tools are now defense mechanisms, and they're really just making you show up like an asshole.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's where our asshole side comes from, right? Okay. All right. So my vision for this online immersion is that our audience is going to walk away being touched by your powerful work, which I'm sure has already happened. And that by listening to you today, that they will be awakened, that something deep within them is going to, come out, and they'll feel inspired to create that change in their life in one or more areas and move towards getting their mojo back. So do you have something that you can share with us today that will help them align with that, help them step into that authenticity, that their own awakening?
I was teaching in Boston, and there was a gentleman who came up to me, and I taught the whole course that I Attachment, Atonement, Attunement, Presence, and Congruence. And he was an addictions counselor, and he said he got a phone call recently about a guy who the guy called him up and he said, "Hey, I'd love to take you to lunch. You saved my life 25 years ago." Mm-hmm. And the counselor said, "Sure," right? And he goes to lunch, and they're sitting there, and they have this whole talk and whatnot. And so finally at the end, the counselor's like, I hate to admit this, but I don't even remember meeting you 25 years ago. Like, how did I save your life? And he said, I walked into my first meeting and you put your hand on my shoulder and said, "You're going to be all right." So in all of our interactions, when we're on autopilot, we're not showing up as our highest selves, and we don't know the influence that we're having on other people's lives, particularly our children and our sisters and brothers and our parents and our loved ones and our best friends. So you really need to check in with who you are, how you learn to be you, why you think the stuff that you think, and then make tweaks, make adjustments. So, you know, like, why don't you like eliminate sarcasm? One woman, I changed her whole life. She went into this whole story about how her sister was just some nanny and wasn't showing up and wasn't making enough money and this whole thing. And I told her, I said, I do this thing called drive-through therapy where I reframe people's lives in 10 minutes. And so I said, I could tell this woman was hypercritical of her own sister just from our discussion. And I said, okay, for the next week, I want you to replace yes, but with yes, and. Mm-hmm. Anytime your sister says, oh, I don't want to go to the gym today, instead of saying yes, but you should go to the gym, say, yes, and I think that you'll be a happier person if you get those endorphins flowing, mm-hmm. right? Just yes, and just like the littlest tweaks in our languaging can reframe, re-enroll people in new relationships by changing our language. So for me, you know, like I hope that Transcendence, the way it inspired you to call me, reach out, and my book and the Udemy course, I really, I'm very proud of. I feel like there's a philosophy there where that when people go through it and they understand why they think the stuff that they think and why they became the person and their own defense mechanisms and their own triggers, at the end of those 2 hours, you can make healthier decisions to say no. Like, I know on my deathbed, like that's the person, like I could have become, I am that motherfucking person.
Yeah. And I think that is probably one of the best, again, that was the one that gave me the chills, like head to toe, and to really, you like tattoo that on the backs of your eyelids. Like when you wake up in the morning, like that is the first thing that goes through your mind is, am I showing up as this person that I want to be today? That on my deathbed, I will be proud of how I showed up? Or am I going to show up as the one that's stepping back, that's withdrawing, that's fearful, that says, you know what, I'll do that tomorrow. You know? So really just using that as like, because everybody's different. Everybody's going to have their own way of showing up in their own brilliance. But really just checking in with yourself and saying, is this how I want to remember myself on my deathbed? You know? So are there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners today? Is there anything else you'd like them to know? Your website?
Yeah, everything is on iraisrael.com. I feel very blessed because there's so many people who came out for me, Marianne Williamson and Reverend Michael Beckwith and Sting and all these people really like showed up for me. So, my book lays things out in a very linear way, but the course on Udemy, Authenticity and Awakening for Lovable Idiots, for people who just want to like slam dunk it, you know, it's 2 hours, and then a whole new philosophy should be available to you to create a happier and more fulfilling life.
Beautiful. You have such a beautiful, and can I say authentic energy about you? You've given us some amazing insights, tools, all of this beautiful wisdom that our audience can use to start really making positive change in their lives. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Courtney. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for reaching out.